This disturbing picture is a French satirical commentary on the display in England in 1812 of a South African woman who was known as the Hottentot Venus. I will give you more details of her story at the end of this talk. But for now, let me simply say that she was the sensation of the salon set in both London and Paris for 3 or 4 years around 1810, and that she was frequently exhibited in a cage. That mode of display having the obvious implication that her fascination largely consisted in the fact that she was regarded by many of her viewers as an animal or as akin to animals and very different from Europeans. I might mention that at that time, her people, the so-called Khoisan or Bushman Hottentot peoples of southern Africa, were in the conventional racist ordering of human beings considered the lowest of the lowest. There's even a story, true, about a party of Dutch settlers who in the 19th century shot and ate a Bushman, thinking that he was the equivalent of the Malay orangutan, and that therefore as an animal it was perfectly all right. The tragedy of this is that the history of scientific views, for the most part, and until quite recently on the subject of race, has supported this social and political notion that human groups are separated by profound and innate inequalities in intellectual abilities and moral behaviors. And by groups, the doctrine has been applied to a wide variety of divisions among us, to races, to sexes, to social classes, for example. This claim of profound innate inequality has never been based on data, because there never has been any data worth much until very recently on the subject of the character and extent of differences among us. Of course, I need hardly say, because it's obvious, that there's a powerful social reason why those in power wish to advance such arguments. After all, there's no better, in the sense of effective, I don't mean the sense of right, there's no better arguments for the maintenance of privileges of those in power than the claim that those without power are so deprived by their innate endowments, and that they therefore are where they should be, and that it can't change. The point is that science is inevitably socially embedded, and this isn't bad. I might say, as a practicing scientist, of course I believe, as we must, that there is an external truth out there. I also believe that science bumbles along fitfully towards knowledge of that external reality, but that it is socially embedded, and inevitably so, because it's done by human beings and not robots, is to me both good and necessary. The point is, however, with respect to the issue of race, that I love science. I do it. I've devoted my life to it. I love science, and I therefore hate to see it misused for social purposes that are also alien to me. And this is why I'm so deeply troubled and offended by the history of scientific views on race. Because I see that history as largely the story of a claim for deep and ineradicable divisions among us. And the whole point of this lecture is really based on a profound irony, because a wealth of new and exciting data show how false that premise of the depth of inequality and the innateness of inequality is. If anything, we're now beginning to realize that there is a profound equality among the different groups of us based on the history of our evolution. What happens in history makes sense. It can be explained. I'm not arguing that the world is a thoroughly capricious or random world. What happens in history makes sense and can be explained, but it needn't have unfolded as it did. The world is not random, but history is massively contingent. And by that somewhat technical term, I mean that the events of history are so dependent on thousands of others that preceded it, each one of which need not have happened in the manner in which it did, that the current state of things, though it makes sense what you know what came before, is massively improbable, though sensible, in that special sense that it could have happened if you could replay the tape of life in 100,000 other equally plausible ways. Now, I think that notion of contingency, the possibility of multiple pathways of history, is a theme that literature understands a lot better than science, or at least is depicted. It's the old story of the kingdom lost for want of a horseshoe nail, right? It's Marty McFly trying to reunite his prospective parents in Back to the Future because he knows that if he can't do it, and his ability to do it is contingent upon tiny little events that have to go in just the right way, because there will be a cascade of consequences if he fails, and even these tiny little events, that cascade leading to his own eradication, of course. And so it is with human equality. Human equality is a contingent fact of history. That is, human evolution might have unfolded or happened in 1,000 other ways that would have been perfectly sensible. And each of those other ways might have left us with a variety of human groups profoundly unequal with respect to their intellectual capabilities and moral achievements. But it just didn't happen that way. It could have happened that way. It just plain didn't. Now let me, before I go into the body of this talk, emphasize the strictly limited nature of the point I'm trying to make. I am using the word equality in my title in the factual sense of that term. That is not, as you well know, its more frequent meaning. I am emphatically not discussing equality as a moral or ethical issue. That is, I am emphatically not discussing the absolute right of each human being to equality of treatment and opportunity. This, to me, is inviolable, and it's not related at all to biological differences or to our biological status. In the ethical or moral sense, the most profoundly deformed stillborn fetus, the most profoundly retarded adult, incontinent and incapable of speech, is absolutely and inviolably as fully human as Darwin or Einstein. Let me then move to the first subject of morphological differences among human races, namely how separate and how ineluctable and deep is that separation among human races. My first stage will be before 1859. 1859 is, of course, a watershed because that's the year of the publication of Darwin's Origin of Species. So when we look at the debate on human racial differences before 1859, we're looking at the pre-evolutionary context. Now, the biggest argument, at least in American and most of European anthropology in the years before Darwin, about the meaning of racial differences centered on a debate between two schools. One group called the monogenists, meaning single source, monogeny, who believed that all human beings are descendants of a single primal pair.